I happen to be an agronomist in addition to being an engineer, so it's very comfortable for me to talk about soil and plant health as well as the engineering aspects of water recycling. There are 5 things that determine plant health, landscape health, when you're using any kind of water, but especially with recycled water. The water quality is number 1, plant tolerances is number 2, soil characteristics is the 3rd one, irrigation management is the 4th one, and the 5th one is probably most important, drainage. So I'll talk about each one of these in terms of what they do together to make up for a nice, healthy landscape for you. You've got a good drainage, you're managing your irrigation properly, you got nice soils, and your plants are tolerant, then any water will work for you. But we don't always have those conditions. Sometimes drainage is lacking. Sometimes the soils are too sandy. And that kind of variation can put pressure on your water quality. And especially when you have a recycled water that's high in salt. Ours is not very high in salt, by the way, if that were the case, or high in sodium, which ours happens to be, then you need to manage it properly in order to have a good landscape. That's why we talk about all of these 5 things as separate items, even though they really work together in conjunction with each other. So let's talk about water quality first. The most important parameters, there are many, many parameters to water quality. There are hundreds of constituents in the water, really. But the most important one are just these 5 or 6 things. Salinity, specific ions, SAR, sodium adsorption ratio, pH, the acidity, whether or not there is turbidity, and plant nutrients. Plant nutrients are beneficial. They're wonderful things to have. We've got an abundant amount of nitrogen, which is the most important one. Sometimes half to 2/3 of your nitrogen requirement for your landscape is supplied in the recycled water. Now, because of this improved system that is going into effect, that's going to be less because this water takes out everything, including your nutrients. So to that extent, it's going to bring less nitrogen to your fields than previously when we had no reduction of salts. But anyhow, NPK, most important nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, are there. Micronutrients are there also in small quantities, and so that's a good source of irrigation for you. Suspended solids can clog up nozzles and emitters, but fortunately, tertiary recycled water is very, very clear. Its turbidity is less than 2 NTU, and it should not cause any clogging at all. pH is within normal units. Sodium is sometimes a problem. And I'll show you some numbers. In our case, it's going to improve with the new system that's going into effect. Same with sodium and chloride. And salinity is going to come down from the previous around 800 milligrams per liter down to 500 milligrams per liter. They're going to keep it pretty close to 500 with slight variations. I'll show you a graphic on that. So salinity, specific ions, SAR, pH, TSS, total suspended solids, and plant nutrients. 6 things that determine the water quality of interest for you. And that distinguishes it between potable water and recycled water. Usually, potable water has less salt than this recycled water from which it comes. But we're making up for that by adding this purified water to it and blending together. The salt toxicity as a result of higher salts can cause root or leaf absorption and cause damage to the plants, but we are trying to minimize that with this new system. Indirect effects are related to soil permeability. Sodium, if it were high in the soil and caused high sodium adsorption ratio, can clog up the soil and prevent water movement through the soil. That's how sodium indirectly affects your plant growth. And that can be cured with calcium addition, with all kinds of management practices. But we have not experienced too many problems with that. There have been some problems in very clayey areas, and especially with very sensitive plants like redwoods. When the soil is already not very cooperative, very clayey, adding some sodium to it causes it to be easily compacted and easily impervious to water, and that can kill a plant, a tree. Majestic tree like redwood can suffer from that. So, difference between potable and recycled: you require more monitoring. There's a potential for salt buildup. Hopefully we're minimizing that with the new water system. Cross-connection control, which you all learned about, that's something that you don't have with potable water, but you are having with recycled water, and you ought to be conscious of that as site supervisors. And backflow prevention and reporting of changes and violations. Let me show you what the blended water TDS, total dissolved solids, is going to look like as a result of addition of this AWT, Advanced Water Treatment System. The variation is going to be very narrow, between 540 and 480 approximately, most of the time. This purple band is actual experience with the, from when they started, April 28 to May 5th. That's the period from which this was taken, continuously measuring the salinity of the blend. It's a very narrow band of variation, whereas in previous years, we had this kind of variation. From 1996 to the year 2014, the early part of 2014, this is not TDS, by the way, this is EC, electrical conductivity, which is another measure of salt. By measuring the conductivity of the water, we get a handle on the salinity of it. It ranged from 1.4 to 1 decisiemens per meter. And as you see, there was some variation. And then all of a sudden, in March, April of 2014, we went to this new system with the AWT, Advanced Water Treatment. And now our salinity is right around 0.85, which corresponds to that 500 milligram per liter that you saw in the previous graph. Is that much nicer? This is something that Southway Water Recycling has done, and no other of the 300 systems that I've told you about in California have done. None of them. And the reason Southway Water Recycling is doing this, one, is to be able to satisfy you as customers in your requirements so that your landscape does better. If you're an industrial user, you get a more consistent water quality at the lower TDS, and therefore better to operate your cooling tower or whatever it is you're operating with that water. That's one reason. And the second reason is to gain experience so that if and when we go to potable reuse, direct or indirect, we've got experience with managing an advanced water treatment system. An advanced water treatment system is a very complex system. Those of you who will go on a tour, you will see that. Microfiltration, reverse osmosis, advanced oxidation. These are complex systems. They're monitored automatically and managed very carefully, but still, having the experience with it gives us comfort that we can do it, and we can assure the public that eating or drinking water that was sewage 11 hours earlier is okay. It's a mind game that we will have to play with the public. Most of the public are not as sophisticated as you are in terms of the knowledge of the technology that goes into treatment systems. So that kind of public education is going to be a hard climb. And part of that climb is going to take place with this experience that we're gaining now with having this system online. So that's where our TDS is heading. Fairly constant, 500 milligram per liter. That is wonderful quality for most uses. This is a graphic showing those parameters of concern that I indicated earlier, how they compare with general standards, where there is no problem, safe, where there is moderate problems, where there is severe problems, at these concentration levels, and how our salt water recycling now stands with regard to those parameters, and how it was before, and the City of San Jose's municipal water. These are all comparison next to each other, one after another. As you see, we have come a long way, and we have improved the water quality a lot. This column is highlighted to show what we are getting now. And as you see, it's much better than it was earlier, and still a little bit higher than the municipal potable water, all the way down. But within tolerable ranges, comparing very well to safe levels of the same parameters. So we've talked about water quality. Now let's talk about soils, soil tolerances. Soil tolerance, plant tolerance to salinity is basically a function of genetics and adaptation. Plants have evolved just like we have evolved over many, many thousands, millions of years, being in their ecosystems wherever they are. They have adapted to that ecosystem and its conditions. A plant growing along the coast, like a redwood, for example, adapts to those conditions along the coast. A plant growing in Texas or Arizona under dry, hot conditions develops into a cactus tree, Joshua tree. You've seen a Joshua tree. Can you compare that with a redwood tree? Evolution. Depending on where you are, how you adapt, how you develop. Genetics. So the soil conditions can make up for some of these sensitivities, but those sensitivities are within the DNA of the plant. The plant species doesn't care about your water. It cares about its own DNA. So if you give it a water that it's not accustomed to as a result of its evolution, its genetic makeup, then it will not behave for you the way you want it to. And of course, we have got tools of even genetically modifying plants. People have been doing plant breeding, animal breeding for many, many centuries. Farmers have learned how to adapt, take the best plants, for example, and use the seed from that plant for the next planting. That's plant breeding. Now we do it in the laboratory with genetic engineering, with GMOs. Have you heard of genetically modified organisms? This is being done in a very sophisticated way, and it's very controversial too. But we try to get the plants to do what we want them to do, right? And what nature intended for them to do through their natural evolution. We just speed up that evolutionary process in the laboratory by injecting genes into plant species to make them behave differently. Watering can also compensate for it too. By increasing the frequency and depth of watering, for example, you can reduce the salinity concentration within the plant root medium, the root zone. And of course, you can consult plant tolerance lists. There are many tolerance lists available in the literature. And this CD that I mentioned earlier has got a long list of plant tolerance to salt, plant tolerance to boron. And from that, you can select the plant that's more tolerant for your conditions. Of course, our conditions have improved a lot so that most plant species can tolerate the recycled water that we have and its salinity. As I said, there's a demonstration garden at the corner of Taylor and Spring where they have been growing a couple of hundred species of plants that are common in the area for landscaping. And they're doing quite well with recycled water, even with its previous salt characteristics. They'll do much better now with it improved salinity from the advanced treatment system. Some of a brief example of the tolerance of various plants to salt is shown here. As I said, there's longer lists in other places. But this one shows that, for example, star jasmine, which is very common in this area, is one of the most salt-sensitive plants that you can imagine. It tolerates only within an EC of 1 to 2. Electrical conductivity of 1 is approximately a salinity of around 640, 650 milligrams per liter. Okay? So EC of 2 is twice that, 1,200. So within that range, you'll do fine. And we are well within that range. We're fine. Now, more tolerant plants go higher than that, more than that. And at the extreme, really tolerant plants listed here, like ice plant, for example, can grow in salinity of 10. That's 6,000 milligrams per liter. That's very, very high salinity. So plants vary a lot depending on their genetic makeup, their evolutionary history. Some of the characteristics of salt-tolerant plants is that they're drought-tolerant, they're deciduous for the most part, they're naturally from saline areas because that's where they evolved, and many of our lawn grasses, many of our grasses grown for lawns are tolerant plants. Some of the examples of plants that survive very well on our recycled water in the past are shown in this picture. Redwood trees are a problem, an issue, not in that they are intolerant to our water. In many cases, they do tolerate very well. But if the soil happens to be very tight, if the area is very highly trafficked and the soil has become compacted, then you add an element of higher salinity too, they give up. You know, it's the last straw that killed the camel's back, that broke the camel's back. You know what I mean? It may not be a big deal, but piled upon all the other problems that the redwood tree has in this area, it causes it to suffer. Because redwood trees evolved along the coast with very, very sandy soils, with very little nutrition. Nobody ever fertilizes redwood trees in the wild, do they? We put them in lawns and fertilize them along with the lawn and everything else, compact the soil, put a lot of stress upon them. So we've talked about soil characteristics that are favorable to recycled water are high sand, low clay content, and good drainage. Less favorable, the opposite of that, high clay, low sand, compacted, poor drainage. Very simple. Managing your healthy soil, soil porosity and its ability to hold and transport water. This is really a cartoon. It's not a real soil profile, but it's a cartoon that shows you that there are pores within the soil profile. There are solid spots, and there are areas where there's water. And the soil particles and the pores all interact together. And as long as there is a good porosity, 20%, 30% within the soil profile, and it's open for movement of water, you're fine. But if that gets clogged up with clay particles all filling up all the empty spaces, then there's no way for water to move through. You basically drown your roots. And that's how managing your soil in a healthy fashion is very important. If you've got a soil that can do that, it can clog up and make those cracked soil conditions that you've probably seen in pictures, then you need to do something about it. And one of those things you can do is adding gypsum, incorporating it into the soil, draining it, and bringing it back to a healthy situation. And soil laboratories can help provide sampling, analysis, and advice about how to deal with those tough situations. And tough situations can occur with any water. It's not just recycled water. If you've got a tough situation where the soil has become impossible to grow anything in, it needs fixing, and it can happen with any water. I'll talk about irrigation and drainage together because they go hand in hand. If you irrigate the soil, you've got to drain it. You can't just irrigate and hope that the plants will take all of it up and you'll be done. No, if you irrigate and don't allow drainage, salts will accumulate. No matter what kind of water you have, there are salts in the water. If those salts don't drain, they'll accumulate in the root zone and kill your plants. So you need to have drainage whenever you have irrigation. Have you heard of leaching fraction? If this plant requires, say, 1 foot or 1.5 foot of water per year, you have to add another 2-3 inches to that depth of water in order to drain the excess salts out of the root zone and push it below the root zone. You have to have soil uniformity of application so that some area does not suffer from lack of irrigation in between sprinkler heads, for example. This is another graphic, another cartoonish graphic that shows all the things that happen as water is brought in, applied to the soil, gradually penetrates the soil. Some of it goes to deep percolation. We want to avoid that. Some of it doesn't go deep enough and leaves some of the roots without enough water. That's poor. That's not very uniform. Runoff is a bad thing. You want to avoid that. Of course, some of it will go to evapotranspiration, which is a good thing. That's what makes the plants healthy. Rainfall helps. Rainfall helps remove some of the salts out of the root zone in addition to your leaching fraction. And in our area, in normal years, we've got enough rainfall to do that. But in years like this, in drought years, we do not have enough rainfall. We definitely have to add that extra leaching fraction in order to move this salts out of the root zone. And I'm saying all this in spite of the fact that we have good water with this advanced water treatment system adding in here. You still can build up salts. With the best water quality, you can still build salts in the root zone if you don't have drainage, if you don't have good drainage, and if you don't apply that excess leaching fraction. That clear? For a good, healthy soil and plant growth, you need to have uniform irrigation, some leaching fraction, and hopefully rainfall to help you remove the salts out in addition to your leaching fraction. Site maintenance is very similar to potable water. You need to have the right plant in the right place, know your soil characteristics, know your water quality, and best irrigation method. Now you know that your water quality with recycled water is just about as good as, almost as good as the potable water, but you still have to have good irrigation practices, uniformity, and leaching fraction. Differences from potable: you need to monitor more frequently, test your soil routinely, leach and amend soil to prevent salt accumulation, reduce or eliminate fertilizers. Because as we've mentioned, you got nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium coming in. Don't add as much nitrogen as you did before. You'll be wasting money. You'll be wasting your time applying more. Cut it at least in half, if not more. One of your friends, your best friends to find out what's happening below your soil surface is a soil tube. This is a very cheap instrument that can give you a lot of information about what's happening below your feet. You push this down, bring it back out, you get a soil profile. You see dry zone right below your feet, you know that your water is not penetrating. Or if you see it saturated, you know you've got a problem with lack of movement of water, and you need to do something about that. So it's a great aid in knowing your soil and plant conditions. Using mulch improves your irrigation and drainage, and gypsum is a last resort to add calcium to make up for excess sodium. Gypsum is a last resort, as I said. It's a very effective thing for curing a problem that has already occurred, but it needs to be done very carefully and uniformly and with expert advice. So don't do it willy-nilly. But our water here has been traditionally very good quality, and it falls in the safe zone where there is no reduction in infiltration based on electrical conductivity and sodium adsorption ratio, SAR. With the addition of the advanced water treatment, it moves a little bit toward this way and down here, so it will still be very good quality. I told you about this CD that's available, and you can get it online too. Some of the common problems that are normally blamed on recycled water, but they are not really cause of recycled water, are too much water followed by root damage or disease, over application of water. That's one of the most common problems and has nothing to do with recycled water. Lack of sufficient water is another problem. Mineral deficiencies, and soil tests can help you with that. Herbicide toxicity, wind acidification, excessive exposure to heat, poor drainage. That's a very common problem. In summary, you need to know your site, monitor it, test your soil, know your water quality, manage your irrigation effectively, ensure good drainage, and use your friendly resources. And this is one good resource is that site I mentioned where there's a demonstration garden for your use.